Welcome to Class 5 on cut and cover tunnels. This is a very popular method used in downtown areas, but it's hardly new. It's been used for over 100 years. This photo is about 100 years old or more. It's a photo of the first subway contract to be let in New York City. The cut and cover technique is very straightforward. You excavate one half of the street, you cover over that excavation, and you can restore traffic over that half while you excavate the second half of the street. So this is certainly a useful tool in busy downtown areas, and I suppose this was a busy downtown area 100 years ago, and it was a very effective tool at that time as well. I blew up a portion of the photo. It's a little hard to read, but it's worth spending a moment on this. This is a stiff leg derrick. It was certainly a helpful tool at the time, but don't think of this as some kind of a quaint historic device. Stiff leg derrick is still in use today, is still a very valuable tool. Back in those days, I imagine it was hand operated by a winch, but it certainly was good enough to erect the steel in the subway. Now this is the boom, and this three-legged arrangement is the stand. Now in the background there is this tower, and I can only speculate that that is some kind of material hoist, and I can picture it being used to lift out the excavated material. There's something very captivating about this photo, and I would like to acknowledge that it came from the New York Transit Museum, and it is dated 1902. It's remarkable in every aspect. To begin with, look at the horse-drawn carriage, and let that settle in a little bit, because that marks the era. So any mechanical device would have 1 horsepower. Nevertheless, in 1900 they began construction of 21 miles of subway system. This included 48 stations and 2 tunnels. They needed to construct tunnels under the East River and the Harlem River because this system ran the full length of Manhattan and had branches into the Bronx and Brooklyn. Now, as staggering as all that seems, it was accomplished in 4.5 years. Now, I find it hard to even say those words because it just seems unrealistic and way out of my realm of experience. The Big Dig, which is the only mega project that perhaps has similar scope, took 13 years, and that was built just a few years ago. So they had little or no technology. This tunnel was built more or less by hand, and they tunneled under 2 rivers and completed 48 stations. The whole thing is just beyond belief, and did it in 4.5 years. Now, I've pegged the cost here at 12 plus or minus $1 billion in today's dollars, but I'm not sure that I have my calculations right. The project cost $35 million in 1900, and I projected that forward at 6% and got $12 billion. I don't know if that's the best way to project the dollars that far into the future, and if there's anyone looking at this presentation who has a better suggestion of converting 1900 costs into today's dollars, I would really love to hear from you. We will fast forward now Into the 21st century, this is a cut and cover project being built in Lower Manhattan, and it's associated with the construction at the World Trade Center. The camera is facing west, and the big open space is the World Trade Center site. Some of the features you may have all read about and know about: the Deutsche Bank, which was condemned after 9/11 because of extensive damage. But the building is still standing in this photo, which is probably 7 years later. And the building is just surrounded by controversy and tragedy. These buildings in the background are the World Financial Center in Battery Park City. And this structure is a kind of a shed roof over a temporary entrance to the path system. What's being constructed here is a passageway which will link the existing transit system with the future path terminal. For orientation, this is Church Street, which is running from left to right, and the intersecting street here is Day Street. Now, Church Street and Day Street have been completely decked over. You can make out some of the deck panels here in this photo, and it's decked over to allow traffic to move back and forth through this very busy site. Now, I waited for the traffic to pass by in order to take a picture which was unobstructed, but Church Street is very, very heavily trafficked, and Day Street is busy and has to serve all of the retail establishments on the street. So this is a very busy spot, and decking over the excavation is certainly the appropriate approach. Now I'm standing below the decking, facing west, the same orientation as I had up in the street. And I'll just point out some of the features here. All of the utilities have been hung from the decking. So the decking not only serves to continuously carry the traffic over the construction, but it's also the support for all of the utilities. This pipe is a fresh air supply for the workspace. Now, you're already familiar with some of the other features. This is a whaler, and these are the pipe struts. And the whaler is reacting against the existing subway station. So this structure here is the existing subway. Let me just point out one other interesting feature. This arrangement here is probably an existing utility manhole which is filled with either telephone lines or power lines, and it's virtually impossible to support one of these massive concrete structures by hanging it from the decking. What is typically done is that you break out the existing manhole, which of course is done with great care, and then you build a temporary plywood enclosure around the cables, and I believe that's what is done in this construction. We're going to see a video showing exactly how the decking is constructed, but the video goes by rather quickly, and I wanted to just point out some of the features in advance. This is the starter wall, which is used to guide the drilling equipment for the secant pile wall. Now, this is exactly the same wall that we saw in class number 3 being installed. The starter wall was not visible because it was always covered with debris or tailings from the drilling. But now in this photo you can see it very clearly, and you can see just exactly how it shapes the construction of the secant pile wall. This is one of the steel beams that is inserted in every other hole. Those are the secondary holes. And this beam has already been cut down to size, and a steel plate has been attached to it. The steel plate is for the deck beam. When you've installed the decking beams, and we'll just go back here a bit, this is a decking beam. Let me point out there's this plate attached to the top flange of the decking beam. That's going to be a guide for keeping the deck panels in place. And once again, here's this starter wall, this scallop-shaped starter wall, which guided the drilling process. I call these Belgian blocks. A lot of people call them cobblestones, but I like the term Belgian blocks because it gives it a sense of history. These blocks came over from Europe in sailing ships, and this practice was in place up until about 200 years ago. So these are very old blocks. They very well have come from Belgium or shipped from Antwerp, and they served as ballast in the ships. The ships must have come over empty or substantially empty and filled up with material from the New World to be shipped back to the Old World. The Belgian blocks were covered over by many later layers of asphalt, and then finally with concrete. So these have been removed, and probably that's the first daylight that the Belgian blocks have seen in over a century. In this slide you can see the laborer is very carefully chipping around an existing manhole. Because of the degree of care and the rather small tool he's using, I'm sure this manhole is alive and filled with live cables, so he's proceeding very, very carefully. It could be that this manhole will now be demolished in place and protected with a plywood structure similar to what we saw before. Let me just point out this fellow is standing on a completed deck. So these are concrete panels which cover over the excavation. We're now going to proceed with the video which shows the process of constructing the decking.